My name is Aaron Lisco. I am currently the manager at Crank Cycles in Makawao. Been on the island for roughly about 25 years. I was born in Elko, Nevada, grew up in Washington State. I moved here in 2001, and I ended up here because I ran into a group of guys going my direction on a bike ride called the Great Divide Mountain Bike Route that goes from Canada to Mexico. I was solo by myself doing this route, never been on a tour before. I made a wrong turn in Whitefish, and because of that wrong turn, I ended up meeting a guy named Johnny. He introduced me to a guy named Ben, and that night we all camped together in the same place, and Ben and I had the same tent. He was like this kindred spirit. We just hit it off immediately, and it turns out that he was the captain of the Kihei Fire Department over here on Maui. And by the end of the ride, we'd bonded. Him and I had become like father-son. He's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Nothing." He's like, "Oh, I got a buddy owns a bike shop in Kihei. What do you think?" That took about 20 seconds. And I really thought I'd be here for about a year, and it's what, 2026 now? So that was 2002. Childhood was not epic, actually, for me. I mean, there was highlights of childhood for sure, but as a kid, I grew up poor. There's 4 kids. Mom and dad split when I was young, so mom's working 2 jobs trying to provide for everybody. There were times when we didn't have food. I went to school mainly because they had breakfast and lunch at school. That was the main reason I went to school. And a lot of times I would go to bed shortly after I got home because if I was sleeping, my stomach didn't hurt. High school was tough because I didn't care to be there. I wasn't a good student. They had the No Child Left Behind initiative where they were not supposed to leave a child behind, but since my grade point average was 1.4, they probably should have left me behind. I dropped out when I was 16 to get a job because I got a girl pregnant and I had a baby, so I had to become responsible, which didn't work very well. I was not ready to be a father, but yeah, got a job, and then that was 16 years old. First job was McDonald's. And then I found a bike shop that actually gave me a job when I was 19 years old. It was my first job at a bike shop, and I kind of fell in love with it. I was like, got to talk to people, I got to work on bikes, and I didn't know what I was doing with the bikes, but I still got to work on bikes and be around bikes, and they got me into cycling, and I started riding bikes more, started racing bikes. I really kind of got into the bike culture, and that job led from one bike shop job to the next bike shop job. And then I got out of bikes for a little while. I actually started working in kitchens. Started in the prep kitchen at a restaurant in Spokane, Washington called Klinkerdagger Bickerstaff and Pets, which is still around. And started off in the prep area in the mornings. And by the time I left, I was the apprentice to the sous chef. And I did that for about a year until I watched my chef kind of burn out and realized maybe I don't want to continue on with the being a chef idea because it was a lot of stress. So I kind of bummed around doing odd jobs, janitor, security guard, and that kind of stuff, until my brother called and said, "Hey, you want to move to Phoenix?" And he had moved down there the year prior, and he's like, "Phoenix is the place to be." So I packed up my car and I moved to Phoenix at the age of 21, and I got a job in a restaurant. And I dabbled in smoking marijuana like I think most kids probably do, but I never tried anything harder than that. But restaurants, as they are a drug haven, at least most of them I've worked at. So I started doing more and more recreational hard drugs to the point where I was doing more drugs than I was riding bikes or being social. And it got to the point where I was doing cocaine, and I remember doing this big fat line, and I looked down and I couldn't see. I was totally blind. I couldn't see anything around me. I couldn't see the stuff in front of me. I was freaking out. I was literally freaking out. I'm like telling the guy, "Hey dude, I'm blind. I can't see anything. I'm doing this and I can't see nothing." And it took about 20 minutes for my eyesight to come back, where I could start to finally see stars and I could start to see things again. And when I finally had full awareness of where I was and I looked around, I looked down at the product on the table, I looked at him and I said, "You know what, you can have it." And I got up and I walked out. The next day, I quit my job at that restaurant. I got myself back on my bicycle, and I never looked back. That bike healed me really from the inside out. As I got physically stronger, I got mentally stronger. My attitude changed about life. I started doing other activities. I started going to a rock gym, started rock climbing, which is where I met my ex-wife, who was an awesome person as well. And those things that I did there led to me doing a bike tour, the first bike tour I ever did, where I ended up running into Ben, and the reason why I'm on Maui. I'm living here on Maui and I'm going to nursing school, and I'm a bike mechanic, so I'm doing my day job. Some days I'm going to school, some days I have night school, but I'm mainly working as a bike mechanic. and I'm headed into this career and I'm headed down that path and I'm doing all the right things and I'm really enjoying school. I hated high school, but I was excelling at college. I was a 4.0 student. 3.8 was the lowest grade point average I've ever gotten. I was excelling at it and I loved it. But this bicycle thing just kept eating at me, and to the point where it just overwhelmed me, and I decided, you know what? I gotta go. I gotta drop out of school. I've gotta go get this thing out of my system, and that's what I did. So in June of 2010, I packed up my bike and I flew to Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, which is the farthest place north you can go. Got on my bike and I started riding, and I rode south into Mexico. My entire trip through Latin America, todos personas muy amable. Everybody was super friendly. They were super kind, just generous people. You know, it was an awesome experience riding through these countries. I didn't worry about my safety. All the way down to Ecuador, I had no problems at all. Everywhere I went. Flying into Egypt during the Arab Spring was quite the eye-opening experience. So I flew in during the ousting of Mubarak and got to see all the uprising firsthand. After that, I ended up in Ethiopia for a little bit and rode my bike from Addis Ababa with a couple from America, John and Sadie, down into Kenya. Kenya down to Nairobi, had a mental breakdown. I flew off to Southeast Asia to Thailand. My brother had been living there, so I figured I'd go visit him in Southeast Asia, decompress a little bit. Cycled around Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos, and then made my way down to Australia, which is where I really fell in love with dirt riding in the outback. I didn't box any kangaroos. I didn't have any run-ins with anybody. I had people stop me in the middle of nowhere. I'd be traveling in caravan and hand me an apple out the window or fill up my water. That was awesome. So I had spent roughly 6 months in Australia, and I was starting to get low on funds. So I started looking for a job when I found a job in Hong Kong. And so when this job came available, I immediately sent an email and said, hey, bike mechanic for 20 years, looking for a job. And they replied within an hour. It was like, yeah, if you want to come up, take a look at what we got going on, we'll fly you up. They threw an apron on me right off the plane. I worked for 7 days straight. And at the end of the 7 days, I was like, yeah, absolutely, I'll take it. Hong Kong was the most amazing city that I've ever been. It was skyscrapers to the sky and just absolutely fantastic food. I was there for roughly 3 months and then decided, okay, that wasn't working. As far as it didn't work because the shop shut down. And then I took a job in Alaska thinking I'd go to Alaska and work the winter. I'd never spent a winter in Alaska. I didn't realize that winter started in August and it would go through March or April, June sometimes. From Alaska, I flew to Mexico City, and I spent about a month in Mexico City working at a bike shop there, just kind of hanging out, enjoying the city. Absolutely fantastic city. And then after I left Mexico City, I took a plane from Panama to Cartagena, Colombia, and I rode my bike from Cartagena all the way to Quito, Ecuador. Worked at a place called Tattoo Adventure Gear for about 3 months. And then I got an email from my brother saying that he'd been diagnosed with ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. So at that point I decided I better stop my trip here. That was gonna be the end, and I flew home. Luckily, it turned out not to be Lou Gehrig's. He is still with us, but he is disabled. And so my decision to stop the trip there, I think, was a smart one. I wanted to be around him just in case he needed anything. What I really learned in my experience traveling around the world was, I think that the greatest thing we can do in our lives is to help other people. And it's because people helped me. They helped my dad when I was younger. I saw people give when they didn't have to. And that happened a lot when I was traveling. People would give me things or help me in a certain way that really made my experience a lot better. Now I try to live my kind of life in that same kind of philosophy that giving back to the people around me, giving back to the community. That's also partly why I'm a bicycle mechanic, because it allows me to do something I love, and it also allows me to help other people do things they can't do.